Coming back home to Tarleton State University, Mr. L.D. Cox.
Thank you so much. It is more than a pleasure to be invited back to the campus of Tarleton. I just love Tarleton. I graduated in 2 years because they didn't have 4. They had a 2-year college. And somebody said, why did no country boy like you join the Navy? And I told them the truth. On weekends, when I was here, I'd go home and see a girlfriend that I was greatly in love with. And on the way home, I'd see posters, Navy posters on telephone poles. And one of the posters said, "Join the Navy and see the world." And the next telephone pole said, "A girl in every port." And I said, "That's for me. I'm here with the Navy." So I joined the Navy, and then after I got to San Diego and finished boot camp, we were about to end the boot camp, and they said, "L.D., what would you like to be? Would you like to be in the Seabees or the regular Navy, seagoing?" And I got to thinking, and I thought, well, I believe staying on shore and building stuff, Seabees, that's a great job. I'll just choose that. About 2 weeks later, I was aboard ship. We started under the Golden Gate Bridge heading out, and they said, "We're sorry, L.D., we don't have a bunk. You'll have to swing a hammock." I swung a hammock for the first week in the mess hall, and night and day, everybody came to the mess hall to get their water and their coffee and all. But I survived that. And I won't tell you this whole story, but I would roll my clothes, shirt and pants up, and stick them on the overhead steel rod that came across the top of the mess hall. And I'd take my billfold out and put it in my pillow slip. And then in the morning, I'd get my pants and all and my billfold. Well, one morning, I got up and reached up, and I had no clothes. And then it hit me. My billfold I hadn't taken and put it in the pillow. So I was completely, I had my shorts, the skivvies, they call them. That's all I had. And I began to look around everywhere in the mess hall. It's a big mess hall, as big as this room here. And I found my clothes over in a bin that somebody had left them, but I didn't have any billfold. And it had what money I had, it had my IDs, it had my dresses, and now that hurt. I mean, I'm sure they don't have mean people like that now and look at, which is a crow's nest, by myself, up tallest, highest man on the ship. I got the full action, if you've ever been on a ship, and it goes this way, and I was right at the top of the ship. So I really enjoyed that. I was supposed to see everything before anybody else saw it, because I was the highest man on the ship, and one time I saw a ship before the radar picked it up. And boy, you talk about getting on earphones, the captain says, "Well done." Oh, whenever you get a well done from captain, that's it. I mean, you're way up there. And it was so foggy you could not see the top of the ship. antennas. And our planes were still taking off in that fog and dropping the bombs, fire bombs, and you could see a glow over Tokyo. And I think we were about 10 miles out. Never did see any land or anything, but I was on duty up in the crow's nest, and directly I heard a motor, an airplane motor, and it sounded awful close, and I looked back to the stern, to the rear of the ship, and there was a shadow thing coming in lower than where I was. It was one of our own airplanes thinking we were a carrier and he was going to land. Well, he did everything he could to pull up and miss the ship, but he caught the landing gear on the antenna right above my head. Knocked off his landing gear and everything, our antennas, thing fell all around me, but I didn't get hit by anything very big. And I watched with binoculars, and he went to the carrier ahead of us and tried to land and turned upside down. After that, we went to Iwo Jima. I saw the flag raised at Iwo Jima. As you know, the most publicized picture that there ever was is on every newspaper, every magazine, was the raising of the Iwo Jima flag. Third day was when they climbed the mountain and put a small flag on top of Mount Kiribati. And you should have heard the toots on the whistles and everything on the ships and the yelling and it was really something, because if you ever thought about disrespecting the flag of the United States, if you had seen it sitting on Survivor, tears would come in your eyes and you wouldn't think about trying to spit on our flag or burn it or destroy it. And I get mad as I don't know what if I see anybody wiping their hands on their flag. And I hope you do. This country is turned in the wrong direction. We're going to have to turn it around. About just a few hours later, the Secretary of the Navy was there, and he said that flag's not big enough. It's just a hip pocket flag, and so he said we need a larger flag to replace this on Sarabati. So they went to one of the ships that had a larger flag, and up the mountain they went with it, and they found a pipe laying up there, and they tied this flag and started to raise it in place of the other flag that was there. And Rosenthal was the photographer that went along with them. And somebody said they're raising the flag, and he was messing with his equipment, his camera. He wasn't ready, but he just wheeled around and took a shot. And then after the flag was up, why, he had them pose, all the Marines and one or two sailors that was up with them. And whenever, 2 weeks later, whenever he's aboard ship, they were all bragging on us everywhere, every paper, every magazine had the picture of the flag raising, and they said, was this posed or snapshot? Oh, it's posed. He didn't even know which picture. He thought it was the one he had posed, and until he got back to the States or to Honolulu and looked, he said, that picture I snapped and didn't know whether I got or not. And for some reason, they ordered me to speak at one of the They sandwiched me in between General Tibbets, who flew the Enola Gay and dropped the atom bomb, and Miss America. She was there. If you talk about pressure, I mean, I never fit speak anyway. And here I was supposed to be on the program between those two. Anyway, right after, well, there's a few things happened. I was off duty, and I was watching the shelling and all of Iwo Jima, and standing there just a little to the stern, and I wanted to use the restroom. Instead of going way down, we call it the head. The Army says latrine. It's actually a restroom. So if I talk about the head, I'm talking about the restroom. Anyway, I needed to go to the head, and we had been told there was one up top side, a good sized restroom, not to use that during battle. Well, I didn't know why, and there wasn't anybody in there, so I thought, well, I'll just go in there and use that. Well, while we carried 3 turrets of 3 guns each, 8 each. That's next to the largest battleships had larger guns, but we carried 8-inch guns, which is pretty powerful. And we were shelling, and I went into the restroom. Well, when I started to come out, I didn't know that the ship had turned toward the island, which brought that gun forward. Those 8-inch, they fire 3 at a time off that. And just as I stepped out on the deck, all 3 of those guns, we had turned, the ship had turned, and they all went off and blew me plumb back in the head. I couldn't hear for a week, and I never used that head again. So there are a few things that you do need to, when they tell you not to do something, you need to. For the invasion, they invaded April the 1st. March the 31st, I was in the mess hall eating breakfast. It was just daylight. And directly over the loudspeaker system said, all men, man your stations, man your stations. I just dropped my tray on the table and headed up the ladder. We called stairs ladders, and we called doors hatches. So I ran up the stairs, headed for my horizon forward lookout where I could go up. And I got midships, and we carried 2 observation planes, one on each side of the ship. They would use the planes with catapult. Anybody know what a catapult is? It's got power. The planes sit here and get all the rev of their motors and all, and about that time it's released, boom, and that plane goes off, and it's in the air within 30, 40 feet just about. That's about how long the catapults were. We carried 2 observation planes. And then when we picked them up, we would put the ship on a little change of course and smooth out the waters, and the plane would come in and land on the water, taxi up to where the ship was, and they had a big hook that they had on top of the airplane, and they had the ring, and they lifted it up and put it back on the catapult. So just as I got midships, I saw this plane, and I thought it was going to hit me, a Japanese plane. And its motor was just screaming, and about that time, one single 20 millimeter opened up on our ship at the airplane, and it came over and hit our ship on the port side, just a few feet from where I was running. And whenever it hit, I went up in the air and came down stomach and looked up, and the airplanes were falling off of the catapults. And on top of one airplane was a sailor and he just fell down about at least 50 feet and hit that deck, bounced, and I turned around about twice, headed back to where I was supposed to be at the battle station. And the bomb was a delayed action bomb. It went down 9 decks and exploded. It knocked off 2 propellers. We had 4 propellers. And it knocked off 2 of them on the port side. All we had was 2 propellers on the starboard side that was working. Seemed like whenever they needed to mess somebody in the mess hall, C was up toward the top of the alphabet. And they'd come down and there'd be Cox. And they'd call on Cox to go down and peel potatoes and wash pots and pans. So I got my share of that. And I was down there doing pans. And actually blood was oozing from my fingertips because I had done so many, with steel wool, so many pans. And an officer came down and he said, "I'm looking for L.D. Cox." And I said, "That's me, sir." He came over and he said, "We see in your portfolio that you have had some college." That made the difference. He said, "We are short in the navigation division, and we need a good man or 2. Would you like to transfer?" And I said, "Oh, yes, sir." Well, they didn't have any mess. All you did was stand watch, and you stood it with the captain and the admiral and all on the bridge. And I said, "Oh, yes, sir." He said, "Drop that pen and follow me." I mean, I dropped it on that steel deck, and you can still, I can hear it still yet. That old pen rattled, and he went up the ladder, and I was right behind him and kissing his boots, licking it. About 15 or 20 minutes past midnight, whoom, up in the air I went and came down on my stomach, and there was fire, there was water, there was debris coming up. We were 81 feet above the water level, and it was just such an explosion. Well, as I looked up, I saw all this, got to my knees, boom, another explosion. This time, it hit midships and hit our munitions, right in the middle of the ship, right under the heavy superstructure. Up in the air it went again, and whenever I got on my knees, started to get up the second time, I looked, and there was the Captain McVeigh standing in the hatch in the doorway. He had a little cubicle up on the bridge where he slept at night sometimes, and he was in his pajamas. And what happened? And the officer of the deck said, "I don't know, sir," because we were by ourselves and it was dark, and the moon was just coming out. Every now and then the clouds were breaking, and we didn't know what had happened. So he got while he was getting his pants on and shirt, the officer of the deck said, "Somebody get the captain a life preserver." Well, I knew where they were. I went down the deck, picked up, and I didn't just get one, I got 2. Guess who the second one was for? I knew enough. I went to Tarleton, and I was smart. So I got me a life preserver, and the captain one. Got it on him, and he sent a runner, officer, a fire control man, to get to the engine room and cut the motors. We were still moving along, taking in millions of gallons of water, just like a sieve, and they didn't know when the engine room's gonna keep their speed, they're gonna do what they were doing until they're told otherwise. And we couldn't tell them otherwise. There wasn't any power anywhere. So he sent the man down, and the man came back in about 3 minutes and said, "Captain, I can't get below decks. There's fire everywhere below decks, and I can't get to the engine room." And he said, "Well, go and try again." So back he went to try again. By that time, it was leaning or listing, so everybody was holding on to whatever they could hold on to. And the fire control man came back and he said, "Sir, we're sinking. We've got to abandon ship." And we were already, you could nearly walk down the stack, the smokestack, when we left the bridge. It sank in 12 minutes. Can you imagine a ship 610 feet long sinking in 12 minutes? Well, it did. And we went down to another deck, and the captain said, "Pass the word to abandon ship." There was no power. We had to yell it with our lungs. And we were yelling, "Abandon ship." And I had read somewhere that the captain always went down with the ship. And I knew that it was about to roll over. And I was going to try to make it to the high side, the port side, to jump in the water on that side, because the thing rolled over, superstructure, everything just take you with it. And I managed to get up to the railing and started to jump. And the moon came out, and I looked, and there was no water. Nothing but the ship's hull. It had listed so far starboard till you couldn't even jump in off the ship without hitting the hull. Well, also there was a main deck below that. I mean, above the hull. So I grabbed a hook that held a gaff, and grabbed that hook and swung as far as I could, and I missed the next deck, and I hit the hull, and then bounced into the water. I imagine 60 feet from where I went off, because we were normally 18 feet as a normal distance to drive. Well, I hit the water, and the first thing happened I thought of, I lost my sailor cap. The next thing, I was drinking oil and salt water. Within a minute, I was vomiting. Everything in my stomach upchucked. Well, I swam as fast as I could away from the ship, and turned after about 50 yards. I turned and looked back, and it was already halfway down, and the propeller still turning, which meant that they still had power in from the engine room turning. And men jumping, you could see in the moonlight, men jumping off that ship, and it was going down. And next thing I felt in my groin was excuse me, kind of a shock, like big air bubbles bursting under you. And there was billions of bubbles, and then it was dark. The moon, the clouds came over the moon, and you couldn't see anything, and there I was by myself out there. I swam on just a little way and came upon one single sailor. And I said, "Hello," or "Who are you?" or whatever. And he said, "Is that you, Cox?" I said, "Yeah." "Is that you, Josie?" "One of my best buddies aboard the ship. And out of 1,100 1,197 men. That's an oddity. That's what we carried as a crew, 1,197. Anyway, I got up close enough to him, and he was burned. Flesh was falling from his face. He'd been flash burned, and he just lasted just a little short few minutes. And then I was by myself, wondering where I was and what to do. I heard screams, and I heard moans and yells and all, and so I began to try to swim over to where I heard the noise, and got over there, and there was a little group of about 30 men that were kind of together. So that's where I spent the rest of my time, was in this little group. It's the greatest sea disaster ever at sea by the U.S. Navy. We lost 880 men. 317 of us were rescued after 5 days in the water, floating up and down in life preserver. Blisters were on your shoulders, blisters on your face. We were on the equator, midway between Guam and the Philippines. And then at night we prayed for night because it'd cool off. Then it'd get cold about midnight. Your teeth would shatter. And you just get so cold you pray for daylight so you get some heat. And that went on for 5 days and nights. We had no food and no water. You're not supposed to live in a life jacket over 3 days, the Navy said. This was 5 days. The new jackets that we had were getting waterlogged. And you'd have to keep your head thrown back to keep from getting water up your nose. And I had always thought up until the last night that I was going to be one of them if this two picked up. Because I was 19 years old and I was full of venom and vitality, and I had won the first place, #1 in our graduating boot camp on endurance, push-ups, climbing ropes, knee bends. I was #1 out of the company. So I was in good shape. And I figured that if this two picked up, I'd be one. But as the days went on, well, the first morning, we began to see fins in the water. Up to a dozen or 2 dozen at a time, circling the group. And you'd look down, and that water was clear, and you could see sharks below you. How many of you saw the movie Jaws? You need to see it yet. The man that is in Jaws, Robert Shaw, claimed that he was aboard the Indianapolis, and he told a little bit of why he was tattooed and how the sharks got him. And so we were accidentally found. I talked to the pilot more than, well, at every reunion he came, the one that spotted us. And he was on patrol in a bomber, a land bomber, and his plane had a new type of radio antenna. It was a wire that went back drifted back behind the plane with a weight on it, about 20 or 30 feet. And it was whipping. So he climbs out of his pilot's seat and goes down there and sticks his head out and looks to see what's going on with this radio antenna. Well, it had lost its weight, so it was whipping. So, about that time, a glint from the ocean hit his eye. And it was an oil slick, and he thought submarine. And he jumps up and he gets in his pilot seat. He opens his bomb bay doors and down he comes. He was going to give us a little bombing. Only thing, I didn't see him. I didn't see that plane. I was drifted off somewhere to where, probably 35 miles away from where he was. But he told the story. He circled, he opened up his microphone, and when he saw sharks and saw men, he opened his microphone and asked for any plane to come over to help. He was nearly out of gas. He circled us until the other PBY plane came. And we called him, Wilbur Gwynn was his name. We call him our angel. He's the one that found us. And then the man in the PBY, he made a swoop over and saw sharks eating men. And he said, I couldn't stand it. I'm going to land right here in the open water, which was against the rules of the Navy to land in the open sea. But he landed that PBY and took on 56 sailors on his wings, everywhere he had, and he had a little water. His name was Adrian Marks, and he was trying to divide the water amongst all the 56 that he had. And he's a wonderful speaker, and he had a speech at one time to the reunion, I have seen greatness. And he tells a story about when he passes this water. More than one sailor said, I've had mine, and passed it to the next sailor. And they were so thirsty, they hadn't had water in 5 days. But still, they were helping their buddies. Anyway, I was off somewhere swimming around about probably 30 miles from there. I didn't even see that plane. And I saw late in the evening, the 5th day, I saw an airplane low and heard the motor. We all screamed and screamed. There wasn't 10 of us left, or maybe 8 out of the 30 that we started with. And we saw this plane. But before then, we had 5 days and nights of nothing but heat, cold, sharks. I had a man within 3 feet of me. A shark came from low, and they'd swim around and come up like lightning and take the sailor. And you wouldn't see him in a life jacket or anything anymore. There was some men that got their bottoms, their legs bit off and all, but most of them were just taken down and eaten and drowned that the sharks got a hold of. And to start with, the first day or two, we had conversation amongst us, but our tongues began to swell and our mouth was dry and we had nothing to drink, and that salt water so tipsy you can't imagine. And so what we tried to do was to stay as grouped up as close as we could together, thinking maybe the sharks would attack the edges or attack other people. There's dead bodies floating everywhere, and they were eating on them, thank goodness. But they would, every now and then, decide they wanted a live bait, and they'd come over and they'd take 1 or 2 or 3 of us. And so after, about the 2nd or 3rd day, I knew we had two officers, and I knew them both, and they swam over to me and they say, Cox, we know that there's a secret island out here, and you're going to be our guide to it. And I said, I don't think there's any island out here. Oh yes, it's for officers only. Well, that was another clue that I didn't believe, that they ordered me to be their guide. So here I go with those two officers. We get about 100 yards from the group, and I said, with your permission, I'm returning to the group because I think it's safer. We come near being found. There'll be fewer sharks. They said, if you want to go back, go ahead. We're going on. Never heard or saw them anymore. Don't know what happened. But I got back with the group, and then we'd have men, you'd see them about 50 yards away, just floating and swimming, and we'd say, ahoy there, have you seen land? And surprisingly, they'd seen land. They just come from land, and they just kept going. They were out of their heads, and I got to where I didn't know whether I was sane or whether I wasn't. But we had one of our buddies that wanted to continue to take his life preserver off and go below for a drink of water. All of our waterboard ship was on the second deck. Well, we'd get all of his preserver and try to tie it back on him, and then all of a sudden we missed him. There was his life preserver, still floating. And he was within 5 or 10 feet of me. But you can't watch somebody night and day. You just look around and you're seeing it and you're about half out of it. Well, he came back up and he said, you've got to go and get some of that water. He had dived down and drank salt water, thinking he was drinking water from our fountain aboard ship. And in a very short time, an hour or two, he foamed at the nose and the mouth, brown foam, and his tongue swelled and he died. You cannot drink that salt water. And after you see that, you're not near as apt to drink it. And so the next day, fourth day, there was no boy. One of the sailors in the group said, everybody be quiet. And it was in the evening late, and he said, there's a submarine below us. And I didn't think there was a submarine below us. I didn't know. He said, I have a walkie-talkie, and there's a submarine, and it's one of ours, and he's going to come up and take us aboard the sub. But he said, do any of you urinate in the bed at night? And one old boy said, I do, in that group. He said, you can't come. They don't allow men aboard submarines to do that. Pathetic, but he was out of his head. He thought he had a walkie-talkie, and he didn't have anything. But back to the airplane that I saw, it came back, or wasn't like it. And every time it just kept going out of sight. And I knew that would be the last time we'd see it. And just before dark, just before late in the evening, we heard the motor again and looked, and there it was, about a half a mile off. It changed course and flew right over us, wiggled its wings, and the no boy in the hatch waved at us. That's whenever your hair stands up, and I used to have hair. Your hair stands up and tears come in your eyes and you know you've been found. Well, it got dark, and directly, a light from heaven comes out of a cloud, a big round light. I thought it was the angels coming. Not sure what, but it was a light that the ship that picked me up shined up into the heavens to give hope to the men that are still alive. And it did. I know some of the buddies that it gave them enough hope to wait until they were picked up. They knew they were going to be. They sent out this pig in the boat. I remember a bright light and a strong hand pulling me into this boat. And they took us over to this USS Bassett. It was a converted destroyer escort. And they had a rope ladder, and they put the rope under my arms, and then I tried to climb, and they pulled and got me up on top of aboard the ship, and I thought I could walk, and I just fell on my face. They picked me up and carried me to a bunk that was canvas covered, and rolled me over, and my hands, I didn't wake up for 2 or 3 hours, and my hands had stuck to the canvas, and nearly pulled the skin off trying to get it loose. And then they came, a couple of sailors, and took me to the shower and tried to get some of the oil. We were solid oil, no heavy crude in the ship. It just solid oil, and you couldn't even recognize your brother. Anyway, they washed me off the best they could, and I had blisters and skin sores. They call it phosphorus burns. And we got to the Philippines at Manila and took me to the hospital, and got me in there, and all my body hair came off, just like a slick onion. All of it, legs and all. And then my toenails and fingernails came off. I was pickled. I'd been in the salt water so long till I just had enough salt in me till I was pickled. Anyway, after about the 3rd or 4th day that we were there, the nurse came in with a newspaper that had a picture of a big explosion. Little boy had gone off over Hiroshima, and that's what it was in our crate. We carried the first atomic bomb from San Francisco to Tinian, and was dropped by the Enola Gay. And so then after another 3 or 4 days, they put me aboard the airplane and took me to Guam, to the Navy hospital there. And we recuperated and came back home on the USS Indianapolis. I've been looking in the magazines trying to find a watch. Mine is just about gone.
We knew what to get you. And also something really special that I think is special. He was telling me today when his house burned down, he lost his yearbook. So this is his graduating picture. I haven't told you about this. This is your graduating picture from the yearbook.
That's when I had hair.
So he has presented that. And finally, this is a flyer of the poster that we sent out to everyone. And everyone at the JTAC has signed this for you. So it's just a special way of saying thank you for being here.
That is so nice. I didn't realize I was that good looking.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. L.D. Cox.